Hello and welcome back to our lectures on the Exalted Treatise on the Response of the Tao. Last week we started this section on failing to take care of material and human resources. As you might remember, we looked at the following lines in black: making clothes without reason, cooking meat without occasion, wasting and discarding the 5 grains. And so this week we come to the last of this category: troubling and disturbing living beings. But before we start on this particular line, I thought it would be interesting to share with you what I read in the news just earlier this week. Read in the news that an estimated 1.3 billion tonnes of food is wasted every year. And this is right around the world. 1.3 billion tonnes is a lot and equates to around 1/3 of all food that is produced. And more than half of that food waste is actually thrown away at home. So within the ordinary domestic family households. And, food waste has become such a concern that King Charles here in the UK will be launching as his first personal project as the monarch, an initiative to try to bridge the gap between food waste and food need. So I thought that this is certainly the line that we read last week happened to sort of prop up in the news earlier. Okay, but that's about not wasting, making good use of the food that we have. We talked about the dietary staples in particular. And then we come to the human resources. So while the above, we have what we wear, what we eat, what we use, and we come to the human resources that are just as precious. What is this idea of not troubling and disturbing living beings or the people around us? As you can see from the Chinese characters, there's an element of causing people trouble, inconvenience, disorder, and sometimes more than one person as well. How does that happen? Well, there are two broad scenarios. The first is where there is, someone making unnecessary work for others, work that maybe they can and should be doing themselves, but they're making others do so, or work that simply does not need to be done. That would be one instance of, troubling, disturbing the lives of others. Some, concrete examples might involve setting unrealistic deadlines that are, more urgent than necessary. Expecting others to respond, for example, to emails or phone calls outside of their work hours. That would be, another case of being overly demanding, being unreasonable. Obviously, there are exceptional circumstances where it is an emergency matter. It is a very urgent case, and that would be that would be an extenuating circumstance. And I thought I'd share with you these lines that crossed my desk, came across from a colleague who shares her time between her teaching and research responsibilities at this university and working on another project and initiative outside. And she had this at the bottom of her email underneath her signature. It reads, "My working hours may not be the same as your working hours. Please do not feel obliged to respond to this email outside of your usual working day." And I thought that was very considerate. Some people might have different consultation hours during the week. Some people might be working off campus for certain days. These days, there are all sorts of flexible arrangements, and this helps, this reminds me to be considerate of other people's working hours. And that's one area that we could sort of avoid this misdeed. One way. Now, there are other instances of troubling and disturbing living beings. There is what we might know as micromanagers, where a person is delegated work, but they feels as if they're not even trusted to get on with doing that work. The micromanager might require that every task requires certain approvals. Maybe they feel that they're the only one capable of effective decision making. They need to be constantly updated. So the staff working under them can often feel like they spend so much time reporting on the details and really not actually having enough time to get on with doing real work, because so much time is taken up by unnecessary reporting, you could say. They might feel that they need to be copied into every email because they're worried about people having discussion about informational details outside of their knowledge or making decisions behind their back. So these are some symptoms of micromanagement, and very often it impinges onto the time and workloads of others, making unnecessary work, you could say. Even worse than micromanagers are the backseat drivers. So they offer unwanted advice and try to meddle in matters that are outside of their remit, outside of their actual responsibility and scope of care. So that can also translate into unnecessary work and being overly demanding on other colleagues. These are just examples that I've thought of, and they're obviously not exhaustive. That's one big category of how the people around us might be troubled unnecessarily. Then there is another category where troubling and disturbing human beings can take the form of disruptive behavior. So someone barges into an office, the lights are on, the door is slightly ajar for fresh air, and they invite themselves in without making a prior appointment or asking, having the courtesy to ask, are you free to talk, etc. And you could have some confidential papers on your desk. You might be marking exam papers, for example. But expecting to meet without prior notice could be one example of such disruptive behaviour. Obviously, interrupting meal or rest times is another example of putting others to trouble. And beyond such physical actions, actually visiting someone, calling on them, sometimes in our day-to-day conversations, asking about someone's private matters. It could be their health. For some women, it could be asking about their age in front of others. And that can be quite embarrassing for them. It could be, at worst, very affronting. So that would be disruptive on a speech level in our day-to-day language. So both of these, and again, it's not an exhaustive list. These are just some examples to be wary about. I remember, in this idea of troubling and disturbing living beings. Many years ago, I worked with a senior colleague, and they were actually head of a particular department, this firm. And they preferred their papers, documents, to be stapled, with the staple being 45 degrees, so it would be easier to flip the page. And on one occasion, their assistant comes in. I happen to be in a meeting in the office, and she has a fresh pile of documents that have been just printed out at the photocopier. And of course, the photocopier automatically staples the documents, and the staples are parallel to the long side of the A4 page. And so this colleague, he takes one look at the documents, he turns the page and he notices the staples are wrong, and immediately throws it on the floor and demands that they be re-stapled to his liking. Now, probably that would be a classic case of making unnecessary work. Outside of the work context, a day-to-day example might be asking a friend or a family member to help buy something from the shops, because they're going that way anyway. And you give them a shopping list, but then you change your mind about the items that you need, or how many quantities you would like of different items. And it might be okay once, maybe twice, but if you keep changing your mind, they might have to visit more than one shop to finish your shopping list, and it could put them to unnecessary stress and trouble. So this sort of misdeed can be more common than you might think. And so, what are some ways that we could avoid this sort of troubling others? Well, we could try and put ourselves in the other person's shoes and ask ourselves, what would we find an inconvenience? What would we find unreasonable, disruptive, or stressful? And not follow through those sorts of behaviors. What would make me feel embarrassed myself or affronted? These are some of the questions that we might turn our minds to avoid troubling and disturbing others. And essentially, by turning our minds to this particular line, it really can help us work better and live better with others, including our family members. So, for example, currently I'm living in staff accommodation on campus, and I share a common kitchen with the other colleagues living on this particular floor in this building. And I know that sometimes they have meetings online on weekends, and it's usually the time when everyone goes about the cleaning chores. So it's as simple as double checking, would it be okay if I use the vacuum cleaner, if I start sweeping or mopping, the common areas, the corridor or the kitchen, would it make loud noises, disturb your online class or meeting? And, I remember asking that question actually when I first moved in, and one of my housemates said, no, it's fine. When the door's closed, I don't hear anything at all. So, even if you use the vacuum cleaner right outside my door, it wouldn't disturb me in any way. So this sort of simple question really sets the right example, I think. It shows people what kindness and caring feels like. Helps person be more considerate. This is just one day-to-day example. And there's a question that if there are resources and texts like the Exalted Treatise, like the Guidelines for Being a Good Person, that can help us improve in these areas, especially not to trouble and disturb other human beings, the people around us. And we don't learn from, we don't make use of those resources, then we really can't blame anyone else when we commit those misdeeds and have to suffer the misfortune. So these are some ideas to think about, not troubling and disturbing living beings. And that essentially brings us to the end of this category of not taking proper care of our material resources as well as the human resources. Okay. Now, in the next category of misdeeds, still in the section of misdeeds, the Exalted Treatise alerts us to some cruel and manipulative behaviour. And you only need to take one look at these sentences to take someone else's property, to destroy homes, to sabotage someone's work, to damage their tools. Even just the first few words will know immediately that this is wrong. This misconduct can carry legal sanctions. It's against the law in many cases. But the Exalted Treatise goes further, and it is not simply the misconduct of theft, for example, but the means that are used to do so. So by ruining someone's family makes it an even worse misdeed. And hence this category is being labelled as cruel and manipulative behaviours. Let's take a look at the first sentence. Taking property and valuables. And not only doing so, but having blatant disregard, reckless indifference to the lives of a whole family of people. So not just one person's life, but ruining the lives of an entire family. That sounds completely unreasonable. When would this happen? Now, in times past, we're talking pre-modern China, there might be government officials who take advantage of their position of power to levy additional taxes, burdening the family households within their jurisdiction, such that the members of the family, able-bodied, have to sort of move out further away in search of work to pay the heavy taxes. That's one example. There are two historical accounts that are recorded in the collected commentaries on the Exalted Treatise. One involves two brothers that inherit property, the family estate, after their father passes away. Now, a third party knows about this and seeks to profit from their wealth. And what this person does is to cause division and conflict between the brothers, so much so that they litigate each other against each other, so they take each other to court, and in the process exhaust all of their funds on the legal expenses and associated costs of the lawsuits. Now, this is an unfortunate case, and the third party actually profited from their losses. It's not clear how, but there are no details as to how exactly they profited, whether they were the lawyers involved or whatever, but there was intentional causation of division and conflict between the brothers. We often hear these days about families breaking up and having to divide their property, and having to fork out legal costs and other fees and costs involved. there's another historical account from the collected commentaries, and this relates to a person and their neighbor, or you could say two neighbors, from the city of Kaifeng in Henan province. Now, one person, this had a priceless garment made of precious pearls. So a very rare item of clothing. It was priceless. Now, their neighbor knew about this and wanted to get their hands on it. But the person wasn't willing to give this item away, as you can imagine. They weren't willing to sell it. But that the neighbor never gave up. And, by hook or by crook, ultimately they resorted to accusing their neighbor of some trumped up charges, such that the poor neighbor, the neighbor who had this valuable garment, had to spend exorbitant amount of money to try to clear their name. And in the process, obviously was essentially bankrupted, had to sell everything that they had. And of course, that valuable garment ended up falling into the hands of their next door neighbor. No surprises there. But not too long after, some thieves get wind of this, and they're interested in this priceless garment. But the neighbor, what does the neighbor do? He puts the garment on himself, climbs to the top of his roof, and takes the ladder away. So the thieves have no way to come onto the property and take the garment away from him. The thieves get angry, and they end up setting the whole building on fire, and the poor neighbor ends up being burnt to death. So not a very happy ending. But this is another example where a person takes property and valuables by ruining someone's family. And this sort of reckless indifference, blatant disregard for the lives of a family household boils down to selfish greed. Made me think about this sentence. These two scenarios that happened, they're most misfortunate. But what about in today, this day and age? Well, time, as ever, is a most precious commodity. And time passes away silently, and you can never get it back. And so made me think, if there were matters, could be to do with our work, our job, if there were matters that were not terribly urgent or wasn't an emergency situation, then maybe we could try to avoid encroaching on the family time of others or our own family, time spent with our own family. And why I say this is when I look back at my parents, you could say maybe they could have worked all hours of the day, every day of the week. Back in the days when my sister and I were growing up. But my parents decided not to do so. And they made this decision because they prioritized the time that they had, the family time, the time that they had with my sister and I, time that they could share their experiences, their knowledge, the life lessons they've learned along the way, to impart wholesome values. They shared with us the challenges they encountered, the mistakes that they made. Hope that we could learn from that and not make the same mistakes, obviously. But they used that time to invest in our character or moral education. And I think that it is, when I look back on that time, they really taught us things that are not taught at school or at university, but essentially are essential to life education. It's not even taught in extracurricular classes, even. So the opportunities for young people to learn and about cultivating themselves, their character, learning to be courteous, kind and caring, and responsible members of society are few and far between, which makes this family time even more precious. So I think many parents often observe that the children grow up very quickly, and you can never get that time with your children back again. This time together to mentor them on what really matters in life and how to be a good human being. That's a limited opportunity, a limited window of opportunity. And as they say, opportunity doesn't knock twice. So we need to seize the day. And in the Analects of Confucius, interestingly, the Confucius would say, we have to be mindful of our parents' age. They're not getting any younger. The age of our father and mother is a cause for rejoicing. It means that we have time with them. But it's also a cause for worry or fear. That, everyone, all human beings have a finite amount of time on this planet. And our time with our parents, they're not getting any younger. Our time is running out, and we should be proactive in seeking to learn from them, learning from their experience of walking further along the path of life, really seeking to understand their example. Maybe we hear the words that they say, but we don't really know what they mean or why they've made those life choices until we really reflect and ask more questions while we still can. This weekend, one of my cousins, she's in the first trimester of her pregnancy, and she took the opportunity to consult my mother about, caring for her fetus, for a baby within the womb, and raising a young family. And so this is one instance. It's not just about our parents, but all of our family elders. If you're lucky enough to have grandparents still with you, you should, all the more reason to be proactive and hearing them out, hearing what they have to say. So that is one way that we can make the most of family time, and to respect the family time of others as well. Okay, so this is about the misdeed of taking property and valuables by essentially profiting by ruining someone's family. Look at the next sentence. Besides families, this relates to destroying homes by breaching dams and committing arson. Arson is, setting fires alight. And essentially this is alerting us to the suffering and damage caused by fire and floods. It's enough suffering that is caused as a result of natural disasters, let alone intentional acts. And it's been said that, the loss of life in a bushfire, for example, when we count the lives of wildlife, the birds, the insects, etc., as well as the human lives affected, is far worse. That cost of life, loss of life, is far worse than any wartime fatalities. So we get a sense of the severity of this particular misdeed, where homes are destroyed. And, if we look at the picture, homes tend to be built fairly close to one another, especially in densely populated areas. So by setting fires alight, chances are the fire and the flooding will affect more than one house. So this is sort of en masse, large-scale damage in causing that sort of disastrous devastation. Now, reading this sort of sentence, if we turn it around, the flip side is, what can I do to protect homes and to protect the physical safety of the people living in those homes, including the pets? And when we turn our minds to that, the flip side of this terrible misdeed, we might think about doing things on a personal level, like learning how to swim, learning first aid, so we're in a better position to save lives, including our own. Being mindful of pool safety if we happen to live near a swimming pool, so that children or other people don't happen to fall in and drown themselves. It might mean supporting disaster relief or emergency rescue efforts in however way we can. And it made me think of growing up in New Zealand. New Zealand is a country that happens to be located on two tectonic plates. And it means that it is especially prone to earthquakes. Now, you could say on a state level, children from an early age, school children would learn how to stay safe in an earthquake, to take shelter from falling debris, falling objects, by lowering themselves, finding a sturdy desk or table, and going underneath the desk or table, but being trained and educated on a regular basis. But this is something sort of statewide, but organisationally. Be interested to know that in this sort of earthquake-prone area, and there are buildings, including the Parliament House, that are built to be able to withstand and resist the movement, withstand earthquakes of a certain magnitude. So these are some proactive ways of protecting structures and preserving the lives of those dwelling within those structures. And I also heard recently that from the 17th of September, later on this month, in Wales here, the default speed limit will decrease from 30 miles per hour down to 20 miles per hour. So in kilometres per hour, that's essentially a decrease from 50 kilometres per hour to just over 30 kilometres per hour. And that's that applies, this is the default speed limit that applies to residential and built up areas to try to reduce the collisions and terrible injuries sustained, and to encourage more people to walk and to cycle. So I think that makes a lot of sense. We need to ask ourselves, what can we do to try and preserve and protect these physical structures, homes, very important, and the lives of all those dwelling within those homes. that's the second part. Now we turn to the third line in this category. This relates to sabotaging someone's plans to thwart their efforts, essentially stop them from succeeding or accomplishing their work. Now, this can be interpreted on, there are two interpretations. And it relates to how the character for plans is interpreted. So, but both interpretations essentially relate to thwarting, defeating some work or achievement or meritorious service, a positive contribution. And interestingly, when we look at the Chinese character for thwart or defeat or destroy, it's made up of two parts. On the left is the character for shell. Now, the shell is sort of round at the top, can be quite long. It has these patterns, just like in the photo. And shells were very valuable objects in the past. At one point, they were traded as currency before, money currency was invented. And so this radical, or this part, this component of this Chinese character, is there to represent something valuable. It doesn't have to be a physical, shell, but a valuable item or possession. On the right is you have a hand. You have 3 fingers are drawn in a stylized sort of figure of a hand. 3 represents all 5 fingers, many fingers. And the hand is holding a rod, a bamboo rod. And it's sort of striking at this valuable item. You can think of someone smashing something. And something precious. And this is the idea where it's either someone's work is sabotaged so they don't succeed, or there's an alternative interpretation where we talked about interfering with someone's work or simply not following the rules and regulations. The character for plans can also relate to policy or model standards, rules and regulations that are necessary for the orderly functioning of a whole. Some organization, it could be the entire community. That's why we have laws in place. So what do I mean by interfering with someone's work? Well, it could be speaking to them, discouraging them from even trying, giving up because we don't want them to succeed. It could be undermining that person, their endeavors, criticizing them in front of others, even reporting on them, criticizing them to their superiors. So undermining their efforts in that way. Now, why that happens is often because of jealousy. Now, we might think that, the other person is much better, they make me look bad, and therefore I don't want them to succeed. But those sorts of thoughts are very harmful. So even before we've caused any detriment to their efforts, having such jealous thoughts is harmful, is a misdeed already, and it's harmful to ourselves. What we should be asking is, well, what are some of the areas that I can improve on? How can I learn from their strengths? And that would be much more productive. And how could I work smarter, for example? That'd be much more positive, and would save us the terrible misfortune from being jealous. Now, on another level, maybe we feel that they're not deserving of being part of that project. We don't want to see them succeed because we know that they've been a bully. Maybe they've been arrogant to us in the past, or for some reason we just don't get along. Well, it's important to remember that no one, unfortunately, is perfect, and maybe the individual involved has some particular strengths that are vital, that are critical to the success of this project or the organization as a whole. So that is even more reason to put aside our personal differences in the interests of that team or that project or that company or organization. So this particular passage, derailing someone's plans, they're in the process of working towards an outcome, but causing sabotage, interfering with their work, or even giving rise to such harmful thoughts, is something that we have to be mindful about. So we don't end up, harming ourselves before we even think about harming others. Now, in the second interpretation, Venerable Master would alert us to, the rules, laws, regulations in place in a society, the law of the land, in a school, we have school rules, in any organization. But they're in place for the orderly functioning of the whole. Now, unfortunately, some people openly flout the rules and regulations. For some reason, they feel that they are superior. They're above those sorts of things. They're better than others. They don't need to follow it. Other people do, but they don't. And this stems from arrogance. It could be because they've been entrusted with certain responsibilities. It could be because of long service. They feel that they know everyone. They can get away with it. It doesn't matter to them. And therefore, they're entitled to the special treatment. It could be as simple as, not having to line up, skipping to the front of the queue. But in doing so, there are two clear reasons why it would be particularly negative, why it would be misconduct. For one thing, the sort of misdeed is measured by the impact on the lives involved. So let's say someone is working on something that could bring benefit to an entire community. Well, when we meddle in their work, we interfere, and they don't end up completing their work, then the community loses out, and we suffer the misdeed for causing that to happen. And the magnitude and the duration of that impact is a direct correlation to the misfortune that we would suffer as a result. Now, the other aspect of this is that by whether it's interfering with someone's work or openly flouting the rules and regulations in place, not respecting the ways of doing things, those regulations and rules have been put in place by someone, and not respecting that, well, it sets a poor example for others. And if everyone did that, then there would be complete disorder and chaos, wouldn't it? So the idea here is that, well, if we had better ideas, we don't want to follow the rules, the existing regulations because we feel that there is a better way of doing things. Well, we should be raising those good ideas through the right channels, and not simply flouting the rules and regulations. And I suppose this helps us, this sort of misdeed here listed in the Exalted Treatise helps us think about, well, how can I help others to work towards their goals? Instead of trying to derail their efforts, how can I help them accomplish? How can I help another person succeed? And we'll go more into look into this a little bit further after we finish the last sentence. But the image on the right reminds us that, having good ideas, having better ideas, it makes the team all that much stronger. That's the whole point. Working together, everyone achieves more. When we listen to everyone, contribute our ideas, that can contribute to the success of the overall team or the project or the organization. But we'll come back to this idea. The final line in this particular category is to damage someone's tools so they become ill-equipped. Someone's tools, we think of the tools of the trade, the resources that we would need to go about our day-to-day work, to be able to earn a living. And to damage someone's tools is essentially to render them useless. Could be they are inadequately equipped, so they don't have enough supplies, or they could be completely unequipped as a result, where the particular instrument they need is completely faulty and damaged. And when I read this particular line, it made me think of, the textbooks or the library books that happen to go missing before an assignment deadline. The word for tools can be broadly construed to include any instrument, any resource, whether it be books or computers or laptops, that are required for someone to go about their day-to-day work. And if you think about it, more so than the tangible objects, the tangible resources, many professions, for many professions, whether that's in teaching, legal practitioners, medical practitioners, part and parcel of being able to do the job is having good character. So being a fit and proper person, because essentially you're in a position of trust. You have responsibility, care of medical patients, care of school-aged children, to guide those young minds, to treat a person's health condition. You're in a position of trust and responsibility. And when we act in a way that causes detriment to someone's character, or reflect negatively on our own, that would also be part of this, be counted towards this particular misdeed. Could be making false and misleading claims, being irresponsible in that way. On a personal level, it could be failing to pay fines, evade taxes, making poor decisions like endangering lives by running a red light because we're running late. Such conduct would cast doubt on our character qualifications and helps us think about respecting other people's character as well. Now, there's a historical account that we find in the collected commentaries, and it also appears in the Collectanea on the Way and Its Virtue in volume 7. And this account is entitled "Harming Others Harms Oneself." relates to two men who would ferry people across the River Huai, and they were based on the southern bank of the river. Now, the names are Mr. Chen and Mr. Xu. Now, Chen's ferry boat happened to move slightly faster, so he earned a little bit more money, and this made his fellow ferryman, Mr. Xu, very jealous. Now, what did Mr. Xu do about it? Well, he would often sneak onto Mr. Chen's boat and cause all sorts of damage. And Mr. Chen was completely unaware of this. This happened on many occasions, and it meant that the boat would be out of service. Maybe it needed to be repaired. And so Mr. Xu could have all of the customers to himself. Well, one night, Mr. Xu actually broke the oars of Mr. Chen's boat. So it was coming up to dawn and daybreak, and Mr. Xu was worried about being found out, being seen. And so he hurries away on his own boat, and he rows, gets to, halfway across the river. And by accident, he actually falls into the waters. So he's struggling in the waters, screaming for help. And Mr. Chen hears him and immediately rushes onto his own boat to try and get out, row out to save his fellow ferryman. But unfortunately, all the oars had been broken, and so the boat literally could not move, and there was nothing that Mr. Chen could do, and ultimately Mr. Xu drowned. So we can see the terrible comeuppance that accrued to Mr. Chen for damaging someone's tools. Happened on so many occasions. He thought that he could actually get away with it. And I suppose really both this particular sentence about damaging someone's tools so they become ill-equipped, and the sentence before, derailing someone's plans so they don't succeed. Both of these lines should make us think about, well, what can I do? Think about what others need and what I can do to help them work towards their goals, help them succeed. To give an example, I'm about to start a new class. Tomorrow. It's a new module to a class that I haven't taught before. And there'll be 5 weeks of class and another 2 weeks of an assessment period for them to complete the assessment tasks. And so I thought, well, the 5 weeks will pass by very quickly. So before the class starts, I met with the class on an informal basis and asked them to tell me about their goals. In the next 5 weeks or 7 weeks, what would you like to achieve? And this is different, might be different from the learning outcomes and the course objectives in the course outline. But what would you like to achieve personally over the next few weeks? What are your goals? And everyone might have different goals. Depends on their aptitudes, their interests, etc. And the other question is, how would you like to improve? There are many areas that you might like to improve on. And if it falls outside of the teaching content for this particular module, Well, maybe I can point you to some resources that can help. Relevant books in the library, for example, or maybe we could meet outside of class. So I can, if I can assist in any way. So how would you like to improve, and what would you like to achieve? This helps me tailor the content over the next 5 weeks in class in ways to help them improve and achieve their personal goals, as well as getting through achieving the learning outcomes as prescribed. This is just one way of thinking about what others need and how I can help them along. And so I hope that this brings to an end the 4 lines of this particular category of cruel and manipulative misconduct. But aside from being mindful of the misdeeds, I hope that today's given you a window into thinking about, well, what are some ways to cultivate the good deeds? Just like thinking about what others need. What can I do to protect homes, to be proactive in protecting the physical safety of others living in those homes? And how can I respect someone's family, their precious family time? So I hope that has given some food for thought. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much indeed.